My beloved, if you have come here seeking knowledge of the chakras so that you may become more powerful, more energized, more emotionally stable, or more admired in the eyes of the world, I must first shake you gently but firmly from that illusion. For the chakras were never given to man for personality, nor for performance, nor for psychic display. They were not placed within you to decorate your aura or to flatter the ego. The chakras are sacred gateway silent, luminous portals through which the soul returns to its forgotten origin in spirit. They are not badges to wear, they are altars to bow upon. To misuse them is to remain a prisoner with golden chains. To understand them truly is to hold in your own breath the stairway to the infinite. There is a great misunderstanding in this age, a glittering deception that has cloaked these sacred centers in emotional labels and rainbowed commercialism, as if the divine intelligence that shaped galaxies arranged these chakras merely for personal empowerment or emotional comfort. But I tell you, child of the infinite, these centers are not here to improve the self. They are here to dissolve it. They are not tools for expression, they are instruments for transcendence. They were placed within you by God, not to embellish the dream of Maya, but to unmake it. You were never meant to stay in this body and decorate its delusions. You were meant to rise breath by breath, vertebra by vertebra through these spinning wheels of light, until the veil lifts, the noise falls away, and you stand face to face with your Maker. Do you see now? That confusion, you've felt that restless ache, despite all your practices, despite the colored candles and guided meditations and affirmations, that ache was sacred. It was the soul crying out, there must be more than this. And there is. The true power of the chakras is not found in stimulation, but in stillness. Not in activation, but in surrender. Not in imagining their colors, but in transcending the very need to imagine. When rightly understood, they are not decorations of the body, they are stair steps for the soul. They are not playgrounds for energy, they are altars of light, designed by God, placed within you to carry your consciousness back to the source. So come with me. I will take you upward not through speculation, but through realization, not through theory, but through the divine science revealed by the great rishis of India and confirmed through my own communion with the infinite. Let us rise now, together. But before we begin the sacred climb, you must first understand what the chakras truly are, not as the world describes them, but as God designed them. Child of the light, before you ever took your first breath in this life, before your soul slipped into the garment of flesh, before your name was spoken or your destiny began to unfold, God placed within you a secret pathway, sacred corridor not made of stone or time, but of divine energy and eternal remembrance. This is the astral spine, the sushumna, the luminous staff of light that rises unseen from the base of your being to the crown of your head. And within it dwell the 7 mighty chakras, not as ornaments, but as living altars, not as decorations for human experience, but as the dwelling places of ascending consciousness. These chakras are not symbols to be admired from a distance, they are doorways to the infinite, vibrating thresholds through which the breath of God rises upward, calling the prodigal soul home to its immortal origin. This spine, this vertical river of divine ascent, is your Jacob's ladder, and the chakras are its rungs. It is the true tree of life, of which the ancients spoke, the same tree seen in visions by yogis and prophets. Its roots buried in the earth of the body, its trunk extending upward through stillness, and its blossoms opening in the light beyond form. Even the scriptures of the West allude to this truth, veiled in the language of vision. And I saw 7 golden candlesticks. It is written in the book of Revelation, these are the chakras, the 7 lights along the altar of the spine, awaiting the oil of devotion and the flame of divine remembrance. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna speaks to Arjuna of the sacred yogi who draws his life force upward through the 6 centers and fixes his gaze between the eyebrows, thus reaching liberation. This is no metaphor. This is the sacred blueprint. And I tell you this from experience, not speculation. The spine is the highway to God. It is the invisible bridge that carries the soul from bondage to bliss, from identification with the body to union with the spirit. In deep meditation, when the breath slows and the world fades, the true yogi enters this luminous inner path, and as his attention ascends from chakra to chakra, each center awakens not as a wheel of color, but as a vortex of divine vibration, each one tuned to a different octave of God's cosmic symphony. He feels the kundalini coiled energy at the base begin to stir, not violently, but reverently, and rise like a golden serpent up the spine, not to empower the ego, but to dissolve it in waves of light until only God remains. But to walk this path, you must walk it not with curiosity, but with reverence, not as a tourist of mysticism, but as a pilgrim of remembrance. The chakras are not for playing with energy, they are for ascending beyond it. Each one is a sacred gate, and when entered with humility, it reveals not power, but presence, not sensation, but surrender. This path is within you. It is not in a book or a mantra or a teacher's touch, it is written in the very architecture of your being. Your body is the temple, your spine is the altar, your breath is the incense. Your awareness is the priest. Come now, let us leave behind all the shallow misinterpretations. Let us move past the myths and confusions. Let us ascend step by sacred step through each chakra, from the base to the brow, not as theorists or seekers of sensation, but as souls remembering what we already are. The climb is not of height, but of depth, not of imagination, but of awakening. And as we rise, we will unmask the illusions that have kept these sacred centers veiled, and discover the truth of their divine purpose, not to keep you here, but to lift you home. Now, my beloved, let us tear away the veils that time and trend have hung over these sacred gateways. For the truth cannot be known until the false has been burned away, and the fire of discernment must be kindled in you if you wish to rise without weight, to see without distortion, to awaken without illusion. You have heard so much of the chakra show, each corresponds to a color, a stone, a frequency, a personality trait, a healing potential, but I must tell you now, in the name of the eternal, that such things, while charming to the mind and comforting to the emotions, are not the essence of these divine centers. These are only garments draped over a sleeping God within you, garments that may distract more than they reveal, colors that may stimulate more than they awaken, myths that may flatter the ego more than they free the soul. You have been told that the chakras are emotional centers, that one is for survival, another for sexuality, another for willpower, another for love, and in this mapping, there is a shadow of truth, but also a great danger, for the soul begins to interpret itself through the lens of emotion, and in doing so, remains caught in the very net it seeks to escape. You are not your emotions. You are not a bundle of energetic patterns shifting from fear to joy to grief to desire. You are the eternal witness behind them all, the divine spark who rides above the wave, not the wave itself. And if you reduce the sacred chakras to emotional centers, you will spend your life trying to balance the shifting sand beneath your feet, never realizing that balance comes not by manipulating the sand, but by remembering you are not the one standing on it, you are the sky in which all of it moves. And what of the colors? The modern mind, so visual, so stimulated by imagery, clings to the rainbow arrayed, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo. Violetas, if coloring the chakras correctly, will unlock the gates of heaven. But I tell you, the soul is not awakened by color, but by stillness. The chakras do not respond to visualization alone, they open to vibration, to silence, to the upward flow of life force consecrated by devotion and deep interior absorption. Even the colors you see, should you glimpse them in meditation, are not fixed, they change according to your consciousness, your purity, your attunement. They are living flames, not glass windows. Do not trap them in paint when they long to burn. And then, there is the greatest myth of all, that the chakras are keys to psychic power, to manifestation, to personal magnetism, to attracting love or success or admiration. This, more than any other distortion, binds the soul to Maya. For when you seek the chakras for gain, you anchor your consciousness in the very world you were born to transcend. The chakras were not placed within you to help you win an illusion, they were given to dissolve the illusion. They are not stairways to better dreams, they are ladders out of the dream entirely. The yogi does not awaken the chakras to become more powerful in the world, he awakens them to rise above the world, to become one with God, to merge his little self with the infinite self beyond all name, beyond all gain, beyond all form. So I say to you, with love and luminous urgency, do not chase energy. Rise in consciousness. Do not decorate your cage, break it. Do not paint the walls of the prison, walk out. These centers are sacred, not because they are energetic, but because they are spiritual. They are not to be stimulated but revered. They are not light switches to flip on, they are living temples to be entered in silence, with breath, with prayer, with surrender. Let us now begin the true ascent, not as energy explorers, but as divine pilgrims. From the base to the brow, we shall climb not to possess, but to dissolve. Not to master the chakras, but to remember the master within. Now, beloved soul, we begin the sacred ascent not in theory, not in imagination, but in interior realization. And the first gate you must approach is the Muladhara, the root chakra, which lies coiled at the base of the spine, hidden near the coccyx, buried not in flesh, but in astral subtlety, resting like a divine serpent asleep in the soil of your deepest being, waiting not for noise, not for movement, not for manipulation, but for your stillness, for your inward gaze, for the breath no longer scattered by desire, for the soul that whispers not, I want, but I remember. This chakra is not about survival, as the world has labeled, but it is about origin, about the source, about the divine potential lying dormant within you like a seed buried in winter soil. Silent, unseen, but holy, encoded with the memory of the tree it is destined to become. The Kundalini rests here not as a force to be forced, but as a presence to be invoked through reverence, through devotion, through the gradual quieting of all that is not God. When you sit in meditation, upright and surrendered, and your breath begins to slow, and your mind begins to bow, and your gaze returns to the sacred point between the eyebrows, the Muladhara begins to stir not with fireworks or sensation, but with sacred silence, with a warmth that is not heat, but remembrance. You must not poke at it, must not try to awaken it with will or fantasy. It is not awakened by demand, it is awakened by alignment. The more you bring your awareness to God, the more this root begins to uncoil not upward through the ego's ambitions, but upward through the soul's surrender. The soul does not climb by stirring the mud, it climbs by stilling the waters. And that brings us to the second gate, Svadhisthana. This chakra, located in the region of the sacrum, just above the root, is associated with the water element, and in the language of Maya, it is linked to sexuality, to desire, to emotional movement, but in divine reality, it is not meant to express the lower, it is meant to be stilled, to be disciplined, to be offered back into the sacred current that flows toward God. The modern world tells you to liberate this center by indulging it, but indulgence does not liberate, it binds. What the yogi learns here is mastery, not suppression, but spiritual refinement thou to contain the life force, how to gather the scattered waters of desire and redirect them into the upward stream. For energy must be lifted, not leaked. Here the soul learns that pleasure is not the end, it is the distraction. Bliss, divine bliss, is the goal. And bliss comes not through excitation, but through stillness, through withdrawal of life force from the outer senses, through concentration of attention at the seat of the soul. Imagine now, beloved, that your awareness is descending gently through the spine in stillness, and it pauses at this watery gate, and you say not, give me, but take me. O Lord, you offer the current of your life into the upward channel. You no longer identify with the craving, you remember you are the witness, the keeper of divine fire, not the chaser of flickering candles. And when this is realized not in intellect, but in breath, the water becomes still. The image of God reflects upon it like the moon resting on a silent lake, and you rise. You do not climb by pushing upward with force. You climb by surrendering downward everything that is not worthy to ascend. From mud to water, and now to fire, we are ready to enter the Manipura, the center of transmutation. And now, my divine companion on the inward journey, as we ascend from the waters of Svadhisthana, we arrive at the realm of fire, the Manipura chakra, the luminous center that burns behind the navel, the third portal in the sacred spine, and here the yogi must pause, for this is the forge of transformation, the temple of inner alchemy, the place where raw desire must be transmuted into disciplined will, where the flickering flame of egoic ambition must be steadied into the eternal fire of divine resolve. This is not merely a center of power, it is a crucible. The fire that burns here can consume you in the fever of pride, in the madness of control, in the illusion of separateness, or it can purify you into gold if you offer your lower tendencies as sacred fuel for the upward climb. The modern world tells you that this chakra is your personal powerhouse, that you must activate it to manifest your goals, to push, to command, to conquer, but I say to you, this fire is not for conquest. It is for consecration. Here the breath must be directed inward and upward. Here the yogi learns to burn his desires, not fulfill them. Not by repression, not by self-denial in the worldly sense, but by spiritual digestion, the act of taking every impulse, every craving, every hunger for status or satisfaction, and holding it in the quiet fire of divine will, until the illusion burns away and only the light of soul purity remains. When the fire of Manipura is misunderstood, man becomes a creature of restlessness and domination, always reaching outward, always seeking more. But when this center is awakened in stillness, it no longer reaches outward, it radiates inwardly. A sun of centered joy, a flame that needs no fuel from the world, for it is fed from above, not below. And once this inner fire has been purified, once the yogi has stilled the hunger for personal identity, the consciousness rises naturally to the next chamber of heart, the Anahata chakra, the fourth center in the spine, and it is here that many imagine they have arrived at love, at kindness, at open-hearted giving. But my child, do not mistake emotion for realization. Do not confuse feeling with freedom. The true heart center is not the storm of emotion, it is the still sky behind it. It is called Anahata, not struck, because it vibrates without collision. It is not a reaction. It is not based on another's behavior. It is the divine neutrality of the soul, the calm compassion that radiates not because of what is happening, but in spite of it. It is the mirror of the eternal self, reflecting peace regardless of circumstance, like the silent sun that shines on saints and sinners alike. The modern seeker says, I feel love in my heart, but true Anahata is not a feeling. It is a frequency. It is the silence from which love arises, the space between breaths where God waits to be remembered. Here the yogi does not try to generate love, he abides in it. He does not reach out, radiates. He does not attach, he blesses. He does not need, he gives, without condition, without expectation, without identity. And in this great stillness of the heart, when the breath has slowed and the spine remains upright like a candle in the inner temple, the yogi finds that all reactions have faded, and only witnessing remains, and in that witnessing is the beginning of true inner freedom. Now, dear soul, having passed through the fire of will and the still waters of divine compassion, the path leads us higher still to the ether, to the sky of vibration, to the soundless sound and the single eye. Now we arrive at the fifth gate, Vishuddha throat chakra, the temple of ether, the gateway of pure vibration, suspended in the great inner sky between the heart's silence and the soul's throne at the spiritual eye. And I say to you, seeker of the light, this center is not about verbal expression, not about communication or speaking your truth, as the world so often repeats it, is about purification, about refinement, about resonance with the eternal sound, the Aum, the primal vibration of spirit which underlies all creation and calls the soul back to its original frequency. When you enter this space in deep meditation, when the breath no longer pants for the world and the ego no longer whispers its needs, you do not feel the desire to speak, you feel the presence of the sound that is speaking everything into being, the silent thunder of God vibrating in the ether, within you, around you, through every atom and beyond all form. To activate this center rightly is not to talk more, but to become quiet enough to hear the Aum, to merge your will into that vibration, to refine your mind until even your thoughts begin to vibrate with devotion, until every word you speak becomes sacred not because of content, but because it arises from alignment with the infinite. The throat is not merely a passage for sound, it is a tuning chamber for consciousness. When misused, it becomes the outlet for the ego's noise, for opinions, for judgments, for endless streams of outer-directed energy that weaken the inner current. But when rightly awakened, Vishuddha becomes the holy portal of mantra, of sacred utterance, of silence saturated with presence, of the inner ear turning to the sound of Aum echoing within the spine. When the breath rises naturally to this center, you will feel it not as a pressure or force, but as a lightness, as though your body were beginning to dissolve into sound. And in that rising, when the attention is pure, when the lower centers have been transcended through surrender and not stimulation, you will find your gaze drawn upward, not outward into space, but inward into the point between the eyebrows, into the Ajna chakra, the sixth center, the seat of divine command, the Christ center, the lotus of indigo light, whose petals are not visible to physical eyes but appear in sacred stillness as the radiant star, the inner sun, the eye of intuition through which the soul perceives the world as God sees it without distortion, without separation, without fear. The ajna is not intuition in the modern sense of vague knowing or emotional instinct. It is the command post of the soul, where perception and will are fused into single-pointed awareness, where duality ends and unity begins, where the soul no longer reacts, but directs not from ego, but from alignment with the divine blueprint of truth. When you focus your gaze here in meditation, softly, without strain, without tension, you are not merely concentrating, you are entering a doorway. And when the energy of the breath, lifted by devotion and stillness, rises to meet that inner eye, it is as if the spine becomes a golden river, flowing upward into the light, and the soul begins to remember, not as concept but as experience, that it was never the body, never the emotion, never the thought, but always the light looking through the body, the silence behind the sound, the eternal self resting in God. You will see colors, yes rings of blue, golden halos, white stars, but do not fixate on them, for even these are thresholds, not destinations. The eye is not the goal, it is the gate. And when the soul bows here, when the breath enters this sanctuary with reverence and quiet awe, then the chakras below it still themselves in perfect submission, and the consciousness is drawn upward as though by an invisible magnet, not by force, but by surrender. And now we ascend to the final lotus, not to activate it, but to understand why it must never be chased, only received. And now, dear soul, as we rise from the luminous throne of the spiritual eye, we come to the highest blossom, the Sahasrara crown chakra, the 1,000-petaled lotus that rests above the physical head, but dwells within the etheric body as the sublime receptacle of divine grace. And I tell you with the utmost reverence, this is not a chakra to be activated, manipulated, or opened by will, by breath, or by force. It is not a portal to be stormed or a summit to be claimed, for the Sahasrara is not conquered, it is surrendered into. It does not respond to seeking, it receives only the presence of that which no longer seeks, the soul that has risen through purification and longing again, until all longing dissolves into holy stillness, and only God remains. You see, the illusion of the crown is the illusion of arrival, the belief that if I can reach this place, if I can stimulate this energy, if I can feel some profound sensation at the top of my head, then I will be enlightened, then I will be fulfilled, then I will become something higher than I am. But I tell you, beloved, there is no becoming in the light of the crown, only being. There is no grasping in the silence of God's presence, only melting. There is no final achievement, only eternal remembrance. The Sahasrara does not activate like the lower center sit blooms, and it does not bloom from pressure below, but from the natural culmination of inner stillness, the magnetic draw of soul awareness lifted entirely out of body identification and absorbed upward in the current of grace that has no beginning and no end. This crown, this lotus, is not a chakra in the same way as the other sit, is the silent altar above the altar, the receiver of divine light, the spiritual canopy under which the soul is wed once again to the infinite. It is not the cause of union, it is the consequence. It cannot be stormed through technique or pride. It opens only when the lower lights have been harmonized, when the spine has become a flute, hollowed of ego, when the breath has become prayer, and when the eye has become the star, through which all duality disappears. The Sahasrara does not ask, "What have you done?" It asks, "What have you surrendered?" And if the answer is everything, then the petals unfold, one by one, not in time but in eternity, and the light that was always above descends, not to crown a self, but to dissolve it. The Bhagavad Gita does not speak of the crown as a goal, it speaks of union. The yogi who draws his life force upward through the 6 centers and fixes his attention between the eyebrows reaches the highest state of realization. Even here, the sacred scriptures point not to the crown, but to the eye, for the crown is not the gadate, is the receiver. The kingdom of God is within, not above. And yet, when the soul rises into that silence beyond all structure, the crown becomes the place where the breath dissolves, where the ego dies its quiet death, where the light that has always waited finally enters, because the soul has finally become empty enough to receive. Let me give you this final image. The flower does not open because it tries. It opens when the root forgets itself, when the water is clear, when the sun rises, when the petals are ready to fall into the sky. So too with you. You do not reach the crown by chasing it. You arrive by forgetting the chase. You ascend not by effort, but by alignment, not by pushing upward, but by letting go of everything that pulls you down. And so we seal the ascent not with a burst of fireworks, not with a cry of victory, but with silence, with stillness, with awe. The journey is not over, for the soul is eternal, but the veil is lifting. And now, my beloved, having walked with me through the sacred ascent not of flesh, but of awareness, not of effort, but of surrender, we arrive not at a conclusion, but at a beginning, not at the edge of a destination, but at the doorway of your return to the divine remembrance from which all life flows. And I say to you with all the love of the infinite echoing through my soul, do not let this knowledge remain dormant in your intellect. Do not let this journey remain confined to the poetry of words or the enchantment of ideas. Make it breath, make it posture, make it your rising and your resting and your every hour in between. For the chakras are not here to be studied, but to be entered, not to be known, but to be lived. And the spine must become your altar, and the breath your incense, and the gaze your sacred vow. So now, sit with men not in pretense, but in presence as it upright, not as the body demanding attention, but as the soul remembering its throne, with the spine as the golden scepter of your inner kingdom, and the breath as the silent messenger of spirit moving through you, not by your will but by divine intelligence. And I ask you to breathe, not as you usually docile and unconscious, but to breathe as the temple breathes, as the infinite breathes, as one who has remembered what was hidden within them all along. Inhale now slowly from the base of the spine, feeling the life force rise through the sacred centers, like a river flowing upward into the sky. And as the current reaches the point between the eyebrows, pause not with tension, but with sacred attention, then exhale gently into the stillness above the crown, not as release, but as return. Do this again now. Inhale from the root to the brow. Hold in awareness. Exhale into Godan with each breath. Do not seek sensation. Seek stillness. Do not chase energy. Become aligned with light. Do not imagine. Remember. This breath is not your sit, is the infinite breathing through you. This body is not your sit, is the temple through which the soul serves its final vow. This spine is not your sit, is the ancient ladder given to every child of God to climb beyond the stars and into the formless brilliance of spirit itself. And now, say this with mano, with your mouth only, but with your cells, with your stillness, with your gaze held at the spiritual eye, and with your whole being surrendered into the sacred sound of these truths. I do not chase energy, I align with light. I rise not by doing, but by remembering. My spine is the ladder, my breath is the prayer, my gaze is the doorway. Repeat it again and again, not to convince yourself, but to install the memory you lost, to resurrect the identity the world made you forget, to seal this journey not with pride, but with holy humility. For the path of the chakras is not a conquest, it is a covenant. A sacred vow between you and your Creator that you will no longer live from the outermost layer of existence, but from the center, from the flame, from the still point within where God awaits every breath of your returning. Every morning, before the body rises fully into the day, return, Haresit, breathe, align. Every evening, before the breath dissolves into sleep, return again, withdraw, ascend, remember. This is your true spiritual practice. Note, 1,000 techniques, but a single awareness flowing upward like light through the hollow reed of the spine, offered in devotion, crowned in stillness. Let the 7 lights become one flame. Let the 1,000 petals fold into the center. Let your identity dissolve into radiance. May your body become the temple. May your breath become the priest. May your gaze become the gate. And now we fall silent, not as absence, but as presence, not as ending, but as the beginning of the soul's eternal vow. And now, beloved soul, we enter the chamber beyond speech, the sanctuary beyond description, the space where the tongue falls silent and the breath becomes the only prayer needed, where the mind bows low and the heart opens, not as a feeling but as a field of stillness. And you, having climbed the inner ladder through devotion and breath and remembrance, stand not as a seeker but as the temple itself, not as a body chasing light but as the light remembering its own reflection. I ask nothing more of you now, except this, to let go. Let go of names, let go of forms, let go of striving, let go of your image of what you should become, and instead sit, breathe, and enter. Close your eyes. Let the spine be upright, like a golden staff connecting heaven and earth. Let the breath be calm, effortless, sacred. Let your gaze rest gently at the spiritual eye, and let your soul rest nowhere but in God. In this final space, there are no instructions. There is only surrender, no climbing, only falling inward. No thoughts to arrange, only awareness to receive. And now, with no movement, with no effort, I invite you to witness not with the outer eyes, but with the inner knowing as each sacred center vibrates once more within your spine, not as myth, but as living presence, root seed of God. Feel it, the beginning, the silent coil, the divine serpent sleeping in peace, no fear, only potential. Sacral river of will. A still stream, not flowing outward in desire, but inward in discipline. The water made pure again. Navel fire of discipline. The flame does not devour, it refines. It does not scream, it glows. It does not burn, it blesses. Heart mirror of stillness. Not a fluttering ache, not a swell of emotion, but a perfect glass in which the soul sees only God. Throat gate of sound. Om vibrates here, eternal and unborn, not to be spoken, but to be heard in silence. I command of soul. A radiant star, a golden halo, the place where all duality dissolves into perfect clarity. Crown light receiving itself. Not a goal, not a peak, only the flower of God unfolding, because there is nothing left to hold. Let this mantra now repeat within you, not from your lips, but from the eternal knowing in your spine. Whisper gently through the breath of the infinite. Each breath raises me, each thought aligns me, each day prepares me for miracles. Again, each breath raises me, each thought aligns me, each day prepares me for miracles. And again, each breath raises me, each thought aligns me, each day prepares me for miracles. Do not end this silence. Do not rise too quickly from this temple. Let it extend into your life. Let it follow you into your morning routine, into your quiet moments, into your decisions, into your gaze upon others. Let this inner rising become your vow. For the 7 are not steps, they are one light ascending. Remain here. Remain here. Remain here. My beloved, let me speak to the ancient part of you, the part that remembers even if your mind has forgotten. There is a law, eternal and bright, that once lived in the heart of every true religion. It was known not by words alone, but by vibration, by soul recognition. And though the centuries have passed like shadows across the earth, this law has never ceased to shine, just as the sun continues to glow behind even the darkest of storm clouds. But oh, how far mankind has wandered from it. The world, once illumined by sages, saints, and Christ-like souls, has turned its gaze outward, chasing rituals and doctrines, forgetting the living presence within. This law is not a rule enforced by dogma. It is a divine rhythm, a spiritual current, a sacred science of return to the infinite. Like sunlight behind a stone wall, always there, always waiting, it has remained hidden, not by malevolence, but by mankind's increasing thirst for the surface of things, the glittering shell of form, forgetting the pearl of truth within. There was a time, lost to the history books, but alive in the memory of the soul, when all religions touched the hem of this universal principle. The rishis of India knew it as Sanatana Dharmathi, eternal truth. The early mystics of Christianity knew it as the path of the single eye. In the quiet temples of Tibet, in the forgotten deserts of the Essenes, it was guarded like a treasure too sacred for the crowds. This spiritual law is not about belief. It is about union. Not about worshiping from afar, but merging into oneness. It teaches that man is not a sinner groveling in dust, but a soul cloaked in forgetfulness, capable of awakening into divinity itself. All the holy scriptures, when seen through the lens of realization, whisper the same truth. The kingdom of God is within you. But to enter that kingdom, there is a science, a method, a precise spiritual law that bridges time and eternity, body and spirit. What is the cost of forgetting such a law? It is the restlessness that haunts even the most devout. It is the endless search for peace in temples built of stone, while the temple within lies dark and unopened. It is the spiritual fatigue of those who pray but do not feel, who chant but do not know, who believe but do not experience. You may have walked 100 paths, tried 1,000 mantras, read the scriptures of East and West, and still felt a longing, unsatisfied, a call, unanswered. That ache within you is the echo of this hidden law trying to call you home. I tell you, not as a scholar, but as a soul who has walked through fire and silence to find God, this law is not forgotten in heaven. It lives still. And now, in this age of awakening, it rises again like the dawn. Let us journey together, my friend, not into speculation, but into remembrance. Let the veil of centuries fall, not by rebellion against religion, but by reuniting with the spirit behind it. You are not seeking something new, you are remembering something eternal. A divine law is not born, it is revealed when the soul is ready. And I say to you now, you are ready. For had you not been, these words would not have found you. Shall I take you deeper now into why this radiant law disappeared from the pages of history, and why the world has wandered so far from its light? There was a time when divine law was not only known, but lived not through sermons, not in stone temples, but in the inner sanctuaries of illumined souls. The great ones knew it not as a doctrine, but as vibration. They moved in harmony with this law, as naturally as the moon follows its orbit around the earth. But as the great yugas turned, as consciousness declined from Satya into Kali Yuga, humanity forgot its source and grew blind to its own soul. What was once radiant law became legend, and then myth, and finally heresy. The science of divine returned the sacred geometry of soul union through breath, stillness, and inner communion, was buried beneath rituals, obscured by politics, and sealed off by the rising walls of orthodoxy. Yogananda explained that truths are revealed in clarity during high ages of consciousness. But when spiritual darkness settles over the world, the light of divine perception is eclipsed. The law I speak of, the sacred law of Kriya Yoga, was not created by any religion. It is the eternal pathway planted in the soul by God Himself, a pathway that the ancient rishis walked, that Krishna hinted toward, that Jesus practiced in silence, and that Babaji revived once the world was ready to remember again. But why was it hidden? Because to possess this law is to hold power not over others but over the self. And power over the self is the one thing empires, dogmas, and fears could never control. In the downward cycle of Kali Yuga, mankind lost the ability to comprehend inner truths. As breath became more erratic, as desires grew louder than devotion, the still sanctuary of divine perception was boarded shut by noise, by haste, by intellect unillumined by spirit. Priests began to teach form instead of force, dogma instead of direct communion. And in this blindness, the true spiritual law Kriya, the science of soul evolution, was placed behind veils of secrecy, guarded by the Himalayan masters not out of arrogance, but to preserve its sanctity. Yogananda wrote, "Whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I incarnate on earth to restore the balance." This is not only the promise of Krishna, it is the inner mission of every spiritual lawgiver who remembers God and vows to awaken others. The West, too, once held the essence of this law. In the desert stillness of Christ's prayer, in the cave-bound revelations of the Essenes, in the whispered words of mystics persecuted by church and state, there flickered the remnants of this sacred science. But those who had the eyes to see were often cast aside, and those who knew the inner meaning dared not speak it aloud. Power clung to ritual. Control feared realization. And so, for 20 years, the world wandered. Yet even when it disappeared from temples, it never left the soul. A divine law cannot die. It can only be forgotten. And just as spring follows winter, as consciousness inevitably rises after its lowest point, so too did this law begin to reawaken. In 1861, deep in the Himalayas, Mahavatar Babaji called to Lahiri Mahasaya and placed once again the living current of Kriya into the hands of one ready to share it. Yogananda was later sent by divine command to carry this law across oceans, to remind the world not only of what it had forgotten, but of what it has always been. This is why this law disappeared, not because it was lost, but because we lost the stillness to feel it. And now, through the grace of the Masters, it is returning not as a secret, but as a sacred trust. And you, beloved soul, are part of that return. Beloved soul, beyond the noise of restless thought and the parade of fleeting emotions, there exists a sacred, low-ancient, unchanging divine. It is not etched upon stone tablets, nor bound by the institutions of man. This law does not tremble before kings, nor does it change with the winds of religious fashion. It is the law by which the soul returns to God, the very science of divine remembrance. And though it was hidden, forgotten, veiled for centuries beneath dogma and dust, this law has waited patiently, like a silent altar within the temple of your spine, untouched but never absent, as if holding its breath for the day when you would turn inward and remember that you were never truly lost. This, dear one, is the law of Kriya. Not a technique, not a ritual, not a philosophy. It is the spiritual architecture of the soul's homeward path. Kriya Yoga is not merely an exercise of breath, but the awakening of the divine altar that lies hidden within you. Just as the stars do not require our recognition to shine, the spinal pathway of light from the base of the spine to the thousand-petaled lotus at the crown has always existed as the inner axis of sacred return. And it is here, in this ascending river of life force, that the forgotten law of God communion abides. Kriya, as I have revealed it, is the science of breath mastery and spiritual stillness, a sacred method taught to me by my line of gurus Lahiri Mahasaya, who received it directly from the deathless Babaji, who gave it anew for this age, knowing that the souls of men had wandered too far into restlessness and needed a bridge to carry them back to their native land of peace. Kriya is not Hindu, it is not Eastern, it is not even mine, it is eternal. It is the divine law that governs how spirit flows through matter, how breath tethers consciousness to the body, and how, through devotion and divine technique, that breath can be withdrawn, the senses calmed, the mind silenced, and the soul released to soar. What you call breath, I call the rope of karma. Each inhalation draws the mind outward, attaching it to the senses, binding it to the play of Maya. Each restless breath fans the flames of desire, and every desire sows new seeds of reincarnation. But what if you could reverse that current? What if, instead of moving outward into the world, your life force began to ascend inward, drawing you back through the inner altar of the spine to the throne of God within? This is the law Kriya reveals. And this is why, though it was known in ancient times, it was hidden not because it was unworthy, but because man was not yet ready to carry it without distortion. It is the sacred fire. Mishandled, it blinds. Revered, it liberates. When you practice Kriya, you do not simply sit and breathe, you enter the temple of the living God within your very being. With every measured movement of life force, you silently bow at the altar of the inner Christ. You disengage the pranic currents from the sense-bound body and lift them, like a priest offering the sacred flame, to the spiritual eye, the single eye Jesus spoke of when he said, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." That light, beloved, is not symbolic. It is real. I have seen it, felt it, bathed in it. It is the law of divine remembrance set into motion. You are not praying for something to happen. You are reactivating what has always been. And so I say again, Kriya is not a belief, it is a law. Just as gravity binds the planets in their course, this spiritual law draws the soul back through the luminous spinal highway, erasing karma, silencing restlessness, and ushering you into the stillness where God lives. Once the breath is calmed, the heart slows. When the breath and heart are stilled, the mind becomes a mirror. When the mind is clear, the soul begins to shine through. And when the soul touches spirit, even for a moment, a million years of forgetfulness dissolve like mist before the rising sun. This law, long buried, has now been given again not to a chosen few, but to every child of God who thirsts for truth. It does not demand your allegiance, it invites your remembrance. The inner altar is lit, the gate stands open, and through the sacred science of Kriya, the long-lost law of the soul's return begins to breathe again in you. Shall we now go deeper into how this law dissolves karma and stills the storm of the world within you? Shall I speak of what it does not in theory, but in the temple of your living breath? Let us walk onward into the chamber of divine stillness where the soul, long exiled, begins to come home. There is a sacred law buried not in stone nor scripture, but etched into the very breath of your being. It does not command with thunderous decree, nor does it threaten with wrath. It simply waits, silent and changeless, ready to return you to God the moment you remember how to cooperate with it. This law is the science of Kriya Yoga, not a technique, not a ritual, but a direct divine mechanism through which the restless breath and vagrant life force are drawn back into their source, just as rivers, having wandered, return to the sea. What this law accomplishes is not metaphysical theory, but a direct intervention upon the architecture of human bondage. It dissolves karma. Not metaphorically, but vibrationally. By stilling the breath, the storm of restlessness is calmed. By rerouting prana through the deep spine, the soul's invisible shackles begin to loosen. Yogananda teaches that Kriya Yoga is the airplane route to God, because it bypasses the long terrain of dogma and discipline, flying straight to the divine engine of transformation hidden in the body's energy centers. When the law is activated through devotion, right posture, and conscious breath, something almost unthinkable begins to occur. Restlessness, that endless tide of desires, comparisons, fears, hungers, and obsessions, which has held the human mind hostage for countless incarnations, begins to recede. A divine stillness replaces it. Not the stillness of death or numbness, but the stillness of eternal life. A vibrant, awake, intelligent silence where the soul feels no need to chase, prove, or react. The breath becomes gentle, the heartbeat slows, and the brain, long cluttered with chaos, becomes a sanctuary of light. In this stillness, you are not merely calm, you are remembered. You are known again as spirit. And so this law accomplishes something greater still. It lifts man from the domain of ego into the sunlight of soul, awareness. You are no longer the one doing the breathing, the one thinking, reacting, remembering. You become the witness. You become the presence behind the pulse, the eye behind the seeing, the light behind the image. Ego, like a shadow mistaken for substance, begins to fade in the presence of true self-recognition. Yogananda often described this sacred reversal as the soul turning its gaze inward, away from the senses, toward the divine. It is not death, but resurrection. It is not transcendence as escape, it is transcendence as reunion. For this law, once obeyed, does not demand from you effort, it allows you to become effortlessness itself. And just as light, though composed of countless frequencies, bends itself to divine law in forming the rainbow, so too does your soul, with all its complexities and karmic vibrations, begin to reflect God's image in perfect, radiant symmetry. The moment you begin to live in obedience to this spiritual law, not by will, but by inner alignment, you no longer ask for peace, you radiate it. You no longer chase love, you become it. And you no longer fear death, because you have already returned to the deathless origin of your own being. For centuries, the great spiritual law, the divine science by which the soul returns to its creator, was hidden from the eyes of the world. Not lost, not destroyed, but guarded. Guarded by luminous beings who did not seek acclaim, but who moved through the centuries as silent stars, guiding humanity through its dark night of materialism and forgetfulness. These were not mythic figures, but realized saints, keepers of a sacred trust. Among them was Mahavatar Babaji, that deathless yogi of the Himalayas whose body defies the law of decay, whose consciousness breathes in the silence behind all life. It was Babaji who, in the year 1861, beheld with sorrow the suffering of souls trapped in restlessness and ego dream, and made a divine decision that would alter the trajectory of the age. He called Lahiri Mahasaya to him, an ordinary man outwardly, but inwardly a liberated master, and re-gifted him with the sacred technique of Kriya Yoga, not as a new invention, but as a resumption of an ancient lineage that had lain dormant during the descending yugas of forgetfulness. Babaji knew humanity was not yet ready for mass awakening. He instructed Lahiri Mahasaya to teach only those who were inwardly prepared, those who had ripened through devotion and inner longing. Thus began the covenant, not one signed with ink, but sealed in divine vibration, that this spiritual law would be kept veiled from the masses until humanity had again climbed high enough in consciousness to understand it, respect it, and not distort it for egoic gain. Lahiri Mahasaya did not advertise. He did not preach. He waited silently, drawing the receptive and the sincere by the magnetism of his realization. Among his foremost disciples was Sri Yukteswar, the sage mathematician who united East and West in his vision of cyclical time and divine law. And it was he who, fulfilling Babaji's instructions, prepared the one soul destined to unveil the secret more fully, Paramahansa Yogananda. The law was not forgotten because of cruelty. It was hidden in compassion. Like a mother keeping fire from the hands of a child, the masters of the ages understood the power of Kriya, how it could lift a soul to cosmic heights. or be misused if handed too soon. And so they waited, loved, and protected it until a day would come, long foreseen, when souls all over the world would awaken with a hunger not for creed, but for direct contact with God. That day is now. What you have searched for in lifetimes past, what your soul has cried for in secret, someone preserved in love, in silence, in radiant protection, and now it finds you. Not because you are lucky, but because you are ready. The law was not lost. It was preparing for your arrival. Religion, in its outer shell, has always feared the inward revolution that threatens to dissolve its control. This divine law, this sacred science of Kriya Yoga is not a doctrine, not a ritual, not a creed. It is a living highway that leads man inward, away from the intermediaries of priestcraft, and into the sanctuary of his own spine, his own breath, his own God-given altar of silence. Why does religion fear this law? Because it returns power to where it was always meant to be, not in temples of stone, but in the cathedral of the soul. When man communes with spirit directly, when he learns to still the breath and dissolve the mental waves, the need for external ritual collapses. The dogma becomes dust. The pageantry fades. No longer bound by the chain of belief, man steps into the blazing certainty of experience. Kriya does not ask for your faith in a system, it gives you the system to discover the faith that lives beyond belief. It is not that religion is evil, it is that religion, when misused, becomes afraid of irrelevance. When the inner kingdom is reawakened, the outer scaffolding must fall away. The law of Kriya, revealed again through the great line of masters from Babaji to Lahiri Mahasaya to Sri Yukteswar and finally to me, breaks that chain gently but irrevocably. This is why I faced resistance when I came to the West. This is why I was called a heretic in religious circles. Because I did not bring a new dogma, I brought an ancient key. And keys, my child, unlock doors that some institutions wish would stay sealed forever. They said, stay in your country, we do not need another religion. But I had not come to give them another religion. I had come to show them the law behind all religions. I stood in pulpits and parlors, in lecture halls and courtrooms, not to argue, but to declare, that which you are seeking in ritual, in symbol, in the voice of another, can be found in your own stillness. And that law hidden for 20 years, yet blazing like a sun behind clouds was Kriya Yoga, the divine science of breath, stillness, and God union. It is feared not because it is false, but because it is too true. It is not resisted because it is weak, but because it is too powerful for those who have grown comfortable with spiritual dependency. The narrow path Christ spoke of was not a narrow belief, it was a narrow current in the spine, through which the soul climbs to its source. Kriya Yoga is that path, and the law behind it is as precise as gravity, as universal as light. Religion feared this law because it makes every man a prophet, every woman a seer, every heart a throne of the infinite. And once you touch it, you will never again look to the outer world for your salvation. You will know the truth. And the truth, dear one, will not only set you free, will dissolve the very idea that you were ever bound. What you call breath, I call the divine tether between soul and body. It is the invisible leash that ties the infinite to the finite, the spirit to the flesh. You believe you breathe to survive, but I tell you, breath is the rhythm of karma, the vehicle of memory, the silent recorder of your past actions. As long as you breathe unconsciously, you are bound. But once you learn to govern breath, you begin to govern destiny. In the sacred science of Kriya Yoga, the breath is no longer the master, it becomes the obedient servant of soul awakening. What is karma but energy in motion, vibrating through your subtle spine, recorded in the memory banks of prana? These impressions travel up and down the astral spine like magnetic grooves carved into a celestial wire. Each thought, each action, each craving leaves a ripple that echoes through your breath. As long as your breath rises and falls with emotion, restlessness, desire, and fear, so too does the karma that animates your delusion. But the science of Kriya is, I said science, for it is no mere ritual or belief, it's the mathematics of the infinite. It is not a guess. It is not even a faith. It is a divine equation, revealed to the masters who saw not through logic but through soul sight. As you direct the life energy up and down the spine with calm will and sacred breath, you begin to erase those impressions. You neutralize the karmic seeds stored in the astral cerebrospinal centers. The yogi saw that breath and mind are like twin horses pulling the chariot of the soul. Calm one, and the other becomes still. Still both, and you step off the wheel of motion into the silence of God. The law I speak of is hidden like gravity. Can you see gravity? Can you grasp it in your hands? And yet every leaf falls because of it. So too, every soul is drawn inward by the divine gravity of God, but only when the law is consciously activated. When your breath is stilled, your prana reversed, and your spine sanctified as the altar of communion, then this unseen law begins to pull you homeward. The sacred current reverses. You are no longer pushed outward by desire, but drawn inward by love. Kriya is not superstition, it is cooperation with the eternal laws of the soul's return. It severs the binding cord of breath. It unknots the rope of karma. It reveals the kingdom within, not by promise but by spiritual physics. And that, my beloved, is why this law is not hidden from you any longer. It is operating within you even now. But when awakened, it does not merely operate, it liberates. The wise men of old, those rishis and prophets who lived in deep communion with the infinite, never wrote scriptures for intellectual debate but as maps to the soul's awakening. Yet, over time, the true coordinates to divine realization have been blurred by theological fog and institutional translation. And so I ask you, beloved soul, has the Bible truly been lost to you? Or has the truth it carried simply been hidden locked not in secrecy, but in symbols, awaiting your own awakening eye to decode it? When Jesus said, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light," he did not speak in riddles, but revealed in plain words the science of divine perception. The single eye is not of the flesh, but of spirit. It is the spiritual eye, the kutastha center between the eyebrows, through which the devotee enters into divine light, into the starry tunnel that leads to God. That Christ utterance is not metaphorical mysticism, it is yogic anatomy. I too have knelt before Christ in the inner temple and heard his voice as a presence within stillness. What he whispered was not dogma, but silence, silence so full, so luminous, that it drew me inward beyond all churches, all creeds, into the cathedral of the soul. Jesus taught not religion but realization. The kingdom of God is within you, not in synagogues or rituals, but in deep, interior stillness. Be still and know. What is this stillness but the dissolution of breath? What is this knowing but the light of the Christ consciousness, shining within the calm and breathless spine? The lost law of Kriya Yoga is not a novelty, is the original practice behind the teachings of the Christ. This is not a claim made in arrogance, but in divine remembrance. Christ never sought to build a religion. He came to restore man's forgotten unity with God. And the method he used, withdrawal of life current from the senses, control of prana through breath, and lifting of consciousness into the inner light, is identical with the science of Kriya. When thou prayest, enter thy closet, not the closet of wood and brick, but the inner chamber of silence. Shut the door of the senses, and there, in secret, commune with the Father. That is yoga. That is the law. Many sincere Christians suffer beneath an inherited guilt, believing themselves to be sinners by nature. But I say, do not accept that burden. Christ did not come to declare you damned, he came to reveal your divine origin. His crucifixion was not to purchase your worth with blood, but to show you how to crucify ego, breath, and restlessness. He said, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." That is not a metaphor, it is a mandate of destiny. He would not command what is impossible. You are not meant to merely worship the Christ, but to awaken the Christ within you. Beloved, this law was not hidden by Christ. It was hidden by men who did not understand him. But the time has come. The Comforter, the inner vibration of Aum, the Holy Ghost is stirring again in the hearts of men. And through the practice of Kriya Yoga, that law of the soul, buried for 2,000 years beneath ritual and forgetting, now rises again like a phoenix from the ashes of misinterpretation. The truth has never died. It waits only for you to be still and know. Ah, beloved soul, how many years have you tried to climb the invisible mountain by merely rearranging the stones at your feet? You've whispered affirmations in the dark, lit candles in trembling hope, marched in circles of motivation and discipline, and yet the summit has not drawn nearer. Why? Because no outer ritual, however sincere, can sever the deepest root of bondage, the breath. The soul is not tethered to karma by thought alone. It is anchored in the rhythm of prana, the sacred life current that flows through your spine. Until that current is reversed, no effort, no devotion, no belief will lift you into the light. It is like trying to set sail while leaving the anchor buried in the seabed. The winds of faith may be strong, the sails of practice may be wide, but you remain fixed in place, wondering why the horizon never comes closer. It is not failure, it is misdirection. Affirmations are sacred. They are prayers dressed in syllables. But without stillness, without the inward withdrawal of life force through pranayama or kriya, they remain whispers on the surface of the lake, never reaching the pearl at the bottom. Rituals, too, are not to be condemned. They hold memory, devotion, rhythm. But if they are done while the breath runs wild, if the spine remains untouched by divine current, then they are as incense burnt outside the temple walls. Motivation? It is a spark but not the sun. It may ignite temporary action, but it cannot dissolve the subconscious burdens of many lives. You must go deeper, beyond effort, into surrender. The soul moves not by striving but by reuniting with its divine breath. This is why I revealed the law of Kriya Yoga not as a belief, but as a divine shortcut for souls ready to fly. One Kriya, practiced with reverence, has the power to dissolve years of mental turmoil, because it strikes the root, the very breath pattern that keeps the soul chained to body consciousness. Many have come to me, weary of years of effort, and found that in silent Kriya, their burdens began to vanish. A mother wrote me once, saying, "All the therapy, the books, the talks known could lift the grief of losing my son. But the first time I practiced Kriya in stillness, I felt him not gone, but bathed in light. I knew he lived, and so did I." Another seeker said, "I meditated for years without direction. But when I began Kriya, the light in the spiritual eye came like dawn through closed eyelids. And I wept not from sadness, but from homecoming." The law is not an idea, it is a vibration. And when you harmonize your life force with the divine river flowing through the spine, you do not merely believe in freedom, you begin to feel it. Your fears fade, not because you conquer them, but because they can no longer breathe in the rarefied air of your soul's altitude. Your habits weaken, not by war, but because the light has grown too strong for shadows to remain. So now I say unto you, stop polishing the boat, pull up the anchor, direct the breath inward. Let the divine tide of the hidden law carry you home. You do not need to be a saint to approach the altar of the infinite. You do not need robes, rituals, or a lineage of outward purity. You only need sincerity, a heart that longs for God more than for breath, and the courage to turn within. The soul, weary from the deserts of doubt and centuries of forgetting, need only whisper a single word of devotion, and the whole universe begins to bend in your direction. For the divine law we speak of the sacred Kriya Yoga, the eternal bridge between breath and spiritus, not a possession of the few, but a gift given for the upliftment of all. It is not a ladder only for those born holy, but a path made holy by those who walk it in truth. The masters never reserved it for the elite, they reserved it for the ready. Mahavatar Babaji, the deathless master who lives beyond the bounds of time in the Himalayan stillness, once declared with divine simplicity, "The divine union through Kriya Yoga will spread to all lands, and those who practice it with sincerity and faith shall be guided by me, whether I appear to them visibly or invisibly." This is not fantasy, it is cosmic promise. And like all true promises given from the divine realm, it cannot be broken. For what God has sealed in spirit, no man can unseal by opinion or doubt. If your heart has ever cried in silence, "I want God," then Babaji has already heard you. If you have ever felt a strange pull to go within, to breathe differently, to listen not with the ears but with the soul's stillness, then the law is already working on you. You have been found. This law is not made of doctrine. It is not sealed in dogma. It is composed of love, precision, and grace. Love for it was given out of compassion by the masters who suffered for the sleeping masses. Precision for it operates not by superstition, but by the exact mathematics of prana, karma, and consciousness. and grace for no soul can awaken through will alone. God meets you in each breath, in each still moment, in each cry for truth. That is the mystery of this sacred law. It answers longing more than learning. It moves faster toward humility than toward pride. You do not need to understand all the mechanics before you begin. You do not need to feel worthy. You only need to begin. For this law has not remained hidden. It has not eluded you. It has been calling you in dreams, in whispers, in the tears that fall when you see a saint's picture, in the restlessness that no worldly thing can ease. It is not you who found this truth. This truth has found you. And now that it has, there is no going back to forgetfulness. You may walk away for a time, but the light will return. The breath will tug. The memory will awaken. The masters do not forget those who once turned their face toward God. They remember, and they wait. So now the invitation is spoken not from the tongue of a man, but from the heart of eternity. Come, O soul, come into the sacred silence. Come to the breathless communion. Come to the divine stillness where all your questions melt in God's embrace. You are not alone. You are not lost. You are not unworthy. You are the one this law was given to reach. Welcome home. Beloved soul, what if I told you that the greatest omission in your spiritual education was not born of malice, but of misunderstanding, that what was hidden was not hidden by darkness, but by forgetfulness? What if I whispered to your heart that the Jesus you have been shown is only the outer garment of a cosmic truth, far more radiant, far more universal, far more liberating than any creed could ever capture? There is a silence in the gospel narrativa, void between the age of 12 and 30, silence so deafening that only the meditative heart can hear what truly transpired in those missing years. The boy Jesus, whose words astonished the temple priests, did not vanish into obscurity. He walked east. He journeyed to the lands of eternal wisdom, where the snows of the Himalayas cradle the saints of India, where the eternal science of yoga was already ancient when the pyramids were young. The soul who was born to embody Christ consciousness was drawn, as if by divine magnetism, to those shores where rishis meditate in caves, where the breath is offered in silence to the infinite, where the third eye is open like a celestial lotus, to glimpse the divine light within. Jesus did not come to abolish religion, but to fulfill it. And to fulfill his universal mission, he sought not the limited rituals of sex, but the direct revelation of the Spirit. He went where truth was undivided, where Krishna and the eternal Om had never been imprisoned in dogma or buried beneath centuries of theological dust. I tell you, beloved, that Yogananda was not speculating when he said, "The teachings of Jesus and Krishna are one in essence." He was remembering. He was testifying from the inner vision that sees through time. He was lifting the veil so you could remember too. And now, you who listen with the ears of the soul must ask, what if two rivers separated by history, by empire, by geography are in truth the same stream, flowing from the one source? What if Jesus drank from the fountain of yoga not to abandon his mission, but to fulfill it as the divine bridge between east and west, between spirit and form, between your soul and its forgotten origin? There is a silence that speaks louder than scripture, a space between verses that echoes with forgotten thunder. And it is in this very silence, the undocumented years of Jesus' life, that the truth begins to shimmer like a mirage across the sands of time. Between the ages of 12 and 30, the Bible falls silent, and yet the soul of Christ was not idle. The silence is not emptiness, it is invitation. For the divine soul called Jesus did not disappear into mundane obscurity. He walked eastward, drawn by the very vibration of God's eternal truth radiating from the Himalayan snows. There, in the sanctified groves and hidden ashrams of India, among saints who had mastered the breath and conquered the delusion of death, Jesus studied not as a foreigner, but as one returning to a lineage he had known in spirit across incarnations. Ancient Indian scrolls and temple inscriptions, preserved in Ladakh and Puri, tell of a saint named Isa, a luminous youth of divine birth, who came from the west to dwell among the rishis and sannyasis. This Isa lived with the Brahmins and Buddhists, spoke of one God, condemned caste, and learned the sacred science of communion with the infinite. He absorbed the teachings of the Vedas not as novelty, but as sacred memory returning. He meditated not as a beginner, but as one rediscovering his own light. In the silence of Himalayan caves, Jesus sat beside men who had stilled the breath, who had seen the blue sphere of Christ consciousness within, and who had entered samadhi, the divine union beyond thought, beyond self. He did not come to borrow from their tradition. He came to remember that it was already his own. And who were the first to acknowledge his divinity at birth? It was not the rabbis, not the Roman scribes, but the wise men of the East Magi, saints, yogishu, followed a divine star to offer frankincense and myrrh, gifts not of superstition, but of deep spiritual knowing. These sages were not merely spectators to a miracle. They were heralds of a cosmic prophecy. And in their bowing, they planted a seed. That seed would later draw the young Christ to their lands, to be nourished by the same divine current they had already recognized within him. It was a return, not a departure. The river had found its source again. Can you not feel it? That the path of Jesus was not broken, but continuous? That the very breath of yoga, the science of God union, through meditation, stillness, and surrender was not foreign to him, but encoded in his soul before birth? He did not come to divide East and West, but to show that truth is one. He traveled not to discover God, but to immerse himself in the sacred tools that would help the world remember God as its only self. And it was in India that the Christ child of Nazareth was fully ignited into the Christ avatar of eternity. Shall we continue, beloved, into the next chapter? The sacred teachings he received among the yogis. In the still, golden hush of the Himalayas, where snow-capped peaks rise like frozen prayers to the infinite, and the silence itself breathes with the memory of sages, Jesus received not doctrine, but direct experience, not sermons, but soul transference. What he imbibed from the saints of Bharat was not a new religion, but the eternal science of self-realization, the sacred art through which the drop remembers it is the sea. These were not teachings to be argued, but vibrations to be lived. The breath, he learned, was not merely air, it was the chariot of spirit, the spine, not just bone, but the altar through which divine light flows, and the mind, not just a thinking instrument, but the veil that must be pierced to behold the face behind all creation. Here he learned what all true yogis know, that there is a center between the eyebrows, a spiritual eye, a luminous portal beyond flesh and thought, and that when one's consciousness is fixed there in stillness and love, the soul begins to see what the eyes never can. When he later uttered, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light," it was not metaphor, it was a map inward, past the senses, into the kingdom not of this world but within. That center what yogis call the Ajna chakra, the Kutastha Chaitanya, the Christ consciousness within is where duality dissolves and divinity begins. They taught him to sit in stillness, to still the breath, to withdraw the life force up the spine into the brain, to merge with the bliss behind all motion. They guided him into breathless communion, where the soul dissolves into God, where time ceases and eternity sings in golden silence. These were not speculative practices, they were scientific. Just as fire always burns and water always flows downward, so too does God always respond to deep inner communion. Jesus practiced these truths, not as ritual, but as realization. And it was through this inner training that the human Jesus was transfigured into the living Christ, not a title of exclusivity, but of universality. He began to perceive, in every leaf and face, in every movement and stillness, the same consciousness that sustains galaxies and whispers within the heart of every seeker. When he said, "I and my Father are one," it was not egoic claim, but the natural result of yoga of divine union. He had touched the timeless, and in that touch, all separation had vanished. He had ascended not to escape the world, but to show the world what it truly was. And thus, when Jesus returned from the East and began his brief ministry in the West, he no longer taught as a man quoting God, he taught as a being who had merged with the infinite. Every parable, every healing, every word carried the silent power of the yogic truths he had absorbed, not borrowed from India, but reawakened in the sanctuary of his soul. These truths were not Indian or Jewish, they were cosmic, eternal, the sacred inheritance of all souls. Shall we now proceed, dear traveler, into the hidden language buried within the very Bible you thought you knew? Let us uncover what was never lostly hidden. awaiting the light of awakened eyes. The scriptures, when read with the eyes of the flesh, become words on a page bound, finite, wrapped in time and tongue. But when read with the eye of intuition, when read in the light of stillness and the fragrance of God communion, the Bible becomes not a book, but a living flame. The teachings of Jesus, like those of Krishna, Buddha, and all illumined masters, were never meant to be entombed in dogma or reduced to literalism. They were meant to be keys golden, mystical, vibrant keys that unlock the inner kingdom within each seeker's soul. The kingdom of God is within you, said the Christ, not in temples made with hands, not in hierarchies or arguments, but in the very silence between your breaths, in the stillness behind your thoughts. Yet how often has that phrase been glossed over, skimmed past like a pebble upon the surface of an ocean, never diving into its infinite depth? And what of the Christ? Was it his surname? No, beloved, it was his state of being. Christ is not a man, but a consciousness. It is the all-pervading, omnipresent, ever-blissful awareness of God individualized within creation. In Sanskrit, this same reality is called Kutastha Chaitanyathe, changeless consciousness behind all change, the unstruck music behind all sound. Jesus, the man, became the Christ by merging into this vast ocean of divine awareness. And the great mystery, the great heresy to the mind bound in fear, is this: you were born to do the same. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect, was not a metaphor, but a call to arms, an invitation to resurrection before death. Even the very structure of Christian doctrine conceals within it the yogic truths of vibration, breath, and inner awakening. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What is this Word, if not the eternal the cosmic vibration that emerged from the silence of spirit and gave birth to all worlds? In the yogic scriptures, it is said that the Holy Ghost, is the first manifestation of God in creation. It is not merely a sound, but the sacred power, the bridge between spirit and matter, the invisible wave upon which light, time, and breath ride. It is the very comforter that Jesus promised, which would abide within us, teach us all things, and bring all truth to remembrance not externally, but within the temple of the soul. And so we must ask, was this truly hidden, or was it simply veiled by the mind's restlessness? Were these teachings buried, or were they waiting, patiently, like the morning sun behind heavy clouds, for the clear gaze of the seeker to behold them? The Christ spoke always in parables, not to obscure the truth, but to protect it, to ensure it would be sought, not swallowed, lived, not merely learned. The Bible was never a prison of doctrine, it was a doorway to silence, to the soul, to God. But only for those who dared to read it with the single eye, with the lamp of inner vision ignited through meditation, humility, and divine yearning. Shall we now move onward, into the heart of Christ himself, not the symbol of religion, but the master of prana, the yogi of light, whose very breath echoed with the power that sustains the stars? Let us continue, not outward, but inward, deeper into the sacred science Jesus carried in his very bones. When you strip away the layers of doctrine, ritual, and centuries of interpretation, and when you gaze inward with the pure eye of the heart, you will see not merely a figure upon a cross, but a radiant being of light seated in lotus stillness, spine straight as a pillar of fire, breath stilled into silence, gaze lifted to the point between the eyebrows, the Christ, the yogi, the Son of the Infinite. Jesus was not only the Lamb, the Shepherd, the Teacher, he was a master of prana, the divine life force that flows through all atoms, all thoughts, all dimensions. His miracles were not spectacles, but demonstrations of spiritual law. His healings were not interventions, but harmonizations of energy. His walk upon the waters, his calming of storms, his raising of Lazarus, these were not violations of natural law, but expressions of a higher law, the law that governs spirit over matter. For he knew what the yogis of India have always known, that breath is not merely oxygen, but the carrier of consciousness, that the spine is not simply vertebrae and nerve, but the sacred highway of divine current, that when one withdraws the restless breath and stills the flickering mind, the soul begins to expand, the senses begin to dissolve, and one's being merges into the vibrationless joy of the infinite. Jesus practiced what in the East is called Kriya Yogathe, sacred science of self-realization, through breath mastery. And though this may seem radical to some, it is not heresy, it is history. It is mystic science. It is soul remembrance. When he withdrew into the wilderness for 40 days, what was he doing? When he fasted, when he prayed alone on the mountaintop, when he spent nights in solitude, these were not simply acts of piety. They were the disciplines of a master yogi. The inner work required to pierce the veil of Maya and commune with the Father in the secret place. Even his death, which so many focus on as the pinnacle of his mission, was not the final miracle, it was his resurrection. His conscious return to the body, his demonstration of spirit's supremacy over the flesh, that bore the seal of yogic realization. He had mastered not only life, but death. He had moved beyond karma, beyond individuality, and returned as the Christ not bound by time or form. And so when you see him now, do not only see the robes and the crown of thorns, see the light pouring from his third eye, see the stillness in his breathless spine, see the calm joy in his eyes as he beholds the Father everywhere, in all, through all, as all. He was not trying to create a religion, he was trying to awaken souls. And the method he taught, whether veiled in parable or lived in silence, was yoganian with the infinite. Not yoga as stretching or posture, but yoga as divine communion, as inward ascent, as the stilling of the waves of the mind, so that the moon of Christ consciousness can shine clear upon the soul's lake. And now, beloved, let us turn to the eternal mirror, to the avatars. Krishna and Christu's lives, though separated by continents and centuries, reflect the same sun. Let us behold their divine parallel, and in it discover our own timeless nature. Let your heart listen now, not with the intellect that measures time and culture, but with the soul that recognizes eternal truth wherever it appears. For when the spirit awakens, it ceases to see boundaries and begins to see echoes of the same divine word, resounding through many mouths, many lands, many lives. Such is the echo between Christ and Krishna, not in their names alone, which mirror each other like reflections in the waters of cosmic consciousness, but in their lives, their missions, and their very essence. Both were born of divine promise, Krishna to Devaki and Christ to Mariech, a virgin mother bathed in light, surrounded by celestial signs, foretelling that the infinite had once again wrapped himself in form to walk among his children. Each was hunted in infancy by tyrants Herod, in Judea, Kamsa, in Mathura, who feared the light that would dismantle their darkness. Each vanished for a time from the public eye, only to return in maturity with a message that transcended ritual and spoke directly to the soul. Krishna stood in the chariot with Arjuna, commanding him not to abandon the battle of life, but to fight as a soul beyond birth and death, guided not by desire but by dharma, and always anchored in the vision of God. And Jesus stood upon the mount, saying, "Resist not evil, but love your enemies," not as a call to weakness, but as a summons to the greatest inner worth, battle to rise above ego and perceive divinity in all. Krishna proclaimed, "When goodness grows weak, when evil increases, I come again and again." Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am," not boasting of historical age, but declaring his eternal identity as the Christ consciousness, the same that Krishna embodied, that Buddha radiated, that lives latent within every human soul. They both healed with touch, taught with parables, confounded the proud, and comforted the humble. They both were rejected by their own, betrayed by those closest to them, and yet forgiven not from moral obligation, but from a love so vast it made no distinction between friend and foe. And their teachings, when read not with dogmatic rigidity but with intuitive stillness, mirror one another like two hands in prayer. The Gita whispers, "Be steadfast in yoga, O Arjuna," while the Gospels say, "Abide in me, and I in you." Krishna teaches the impermanence of body, the eternity of soul. Jesus says, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth." Krishna speaks of the self as unborn, undying, untouched by weapon or fire. Jesus declares, "Fear not them which kill the body, but fear not at all, for I am with you always." This is not coincidence. This is the timeless fragrance of one spirit blowing through many gardens. The light of God did not shine one seat, shines eternally, and when it takes form in a Christ or a Krishna, It does so not to start a new faith, but to remind the sleeping soul of its origin. There is no east or west in spirit. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but its light belongs to the world, and so too does truth. Let us now lift our gaze to the one who came, not to speak, but to awaken, not to found a religion, but to recall the ancient unity, the deathless yogi, the eternal seer, whose mission was to fuse Krishna and Christ once more in the hearts of all mankind. Let us walk with Babaji. In the high Himalayan solitudes where the noise of the world cannot climb, where the winds speak secrets to the snows and the silence itself has memory, there dwells one whose presence defies time, whose body answers to no decay, and whose mission is a golden bridge spanning centuries and civilizations. Babaji, the deathless yogi, is not legend but luminous fact spoken of by saints, seen by sages, and known to those whose souls have brushed the hem of the infinite. He is not merely a man but a divine messenger, a silent flame whose very existence proves that the spirit, once anchored fully in God, can transcend all laws of matter. It was he who summoned Lahiri Mahasaya, not with words but with will, and re-gifted to the world the sacred science that had long been hidden, the Kriya Yoga of the Rishis, the spinal path to divine awakening, the key to Christ consciousness within the human form. But more than a technique, Babaji came bearing a mission as vast as the Skyesa task not of religion, but of reunion. The time has come, he declared in that cosmic cave, to reawaken the West to the inner Christ not as a crucified idol, but as a living power within the soul. And whom did he choose to carry this sacred current across oceans and continents? A young monk with the eyes of a lion and the heart of a child, born in Bengal, yet destined to stand before presidents and peasants alike myself, your brother, your friend, sent not by ambition but by divine ordainment, for it was not enough to chant Krishna's name in India while the West worshipped Christ in separation. The two had to be revealed as one unlight, one truth, one consciousness, wearing two divine faces. The wisdom of the East had become veiled in ceremony, and the faith of the West had hardened into creed. Babaji's mission was to melt the ice around the heart of both and let the rivers of spirit flow together once more. He knew, as I came to know, that Krishna and Christ were not founders of rival religions, but expressions of the same infinite flame that, their lives, miracles, messages, and even their silent suffering, all pointed to the same center, that within each human soul dwells the kingdom of God, waiting to be known not through belief, but through realization. It was not a small task. To walk into the land of cathedrals and offer the Gita alongside the gospel was not to blend doctrines, but to awaken the soul's deeper remembrance that behind every scripture, if you listen with inner ears, the same voice is speaking. It says, "You are not a sinner, you are my child." It says, "Be still, and know I am God, not in a temple, not in a cloud, but in the still cave of your breath, in the sacred altar of your spine." That is the mission Babaji gave, and I accepted not as duty, but as love's calling. For what else is there to do, once you know that the same God who walked with Moses also danced with Radha, who whispered to Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, and rose again in Jesus from the tomb? Let the dogmas fall like dry leaves. Let the soul awaken to spring. The time of separation is over. The flame that was hidden in the Himalayas has traveled westward in silence, lit now in your heart by grace, by longing, and by this very remembrance. You are not separate, you are not forgotten. The lamp of Babaji burns even now, and if you will sit still and breathe with reverence, its light will rise in your own being and whisper to you, as it did to me, "Go forth and remind them they are not dust, but divinity." You were not born to be broken. You were not placed in this world to wander through guilt like a beggar knocking at heaven's gate. You are not a mistake wearing a body, nor a sinner condemned by circumstance. You are light temporarily clothed in matter, spirit dreaming of itself, and even now, in your quiet breath, the pulse of God is whispering the ancient truth that no priest can bestow and no sin can erase, that Christ is not a name to worship, but a consciousness to awaken. This is the lost gospel, not of parchment and parable, but of inner realization. It is the gospel that Jesus knew when he said, not with pride, but with radiant knowing, "I and my Father are one." And it is the gospel he offered when he also said, "Be ye therefore perfect, not as commandment, but as remembrance. He did not come to parade his divinity above yours, she came to remind you of your own. Oh, how long the world has walked under the shadow of separation, mistaking humility for unworthiness and reverence for distance. But Christ did not come to create worshipers. He came to awaken lovers of God. He came not to build temples of stone, but to reveal the temple of your spine and breath, where the Holy Spirit, the sacred vibration of Aum, forever sings its hymn of union in the quiet chambers of your soul. And in this temple, there is no altar but love, no priest but stillness, and no offering but your longing to return to what you already are. This, my beloved, is the Christ that lives in you, not the crucified symbol of sorrow, but the ever-rising joy that cannot be held by death, time, or dogma. It is this inner Christ, this Kutastha Chaitanya, this immutable light between the eyebrows, that the yogis of India have worshipped since ancient times, not through belief, but through breath, through silence, through the practice of awakening the spiritual eye and lifting the mind beyond the turbulence of thought into the still waters of divine remembrance. This is your birthright, not someday, not after 1,000 penances, but now. Even as you listen, something in you knows, this is what I've always known. This is what I've been trying to remember. You are not waiting for the Christ to descend from clouds of fire. You are waiting to still your breath long enough to feel him already there in your spine, in your heartbeat, in the aching hunger you carry for something this world has never been able to offer. That hunger is holy. Do not run from it. It is Christ himself knocking at the door of your restlessness, saying, "Let me in, not so I can take you somewhere, but so I can show you you are already home." So, cast off the chains of unworthiness. Let go of the thought that holiness lives in others but not in you. You are not just a seeker of God, you are the image of God seeking itself. And when you sit to meditate, not as a sinner begging for grace, but as a soul daring to remember its origin, then the Christ within you rises not as myth, but as presence, and not as history, but as truth. You were not meant to worship Christ from afar. You were meant to become him from within. Let that become your sacred vow. Let that be your second coming. Let that be the moment you stop reaching outward and begin rising inward, into the light that was never lost, only forgotten. There is a moment, silent as snow upon a sleeping field, when the soul awakens not with fanfare, not with lightning or prophetic fire, but with the quiet and irrefutable knowing that God was never far, that Christ was never absent, that heaven has never been lost, only unremembered. This, beloved, is the second coming. Not the thunderous descent of a man through the clouds to strike the wicked and gather the saved, not the clash of angels and armies at the end of days, but the still and radiant uprising of Christ within your very being, like the sun that has waited behind your closed eyes, like the light that dawns not in the sky but in the quiet chamber behind the forehead, at the altar of the spiritual eye. Yogananda said it plainly, clearly, eternally. The second coming of Christ is the resurrection of the Christ consciousness in your own heart. The world has waited 2,000 years for a trumpet that will not sound in the air but already echoes in the soul. It waits for signs in the heavens while ignoring the signs in its own breath. It fears wrath and tribulation, yet misses the whisper of peace that comes when thought is stilled and the soul becomes the sky, vast and open to the descent of grace. Jesus did not point to himself as a spectacle to be worshipped. He pointed to the Father, to the light that shines beyond name and form. He promised not just return but indwelling. "I will not leave you comfortless," he said. "I will come to you." And how does he come? Not through fire or judgment, but as the Comforter, the Holy Ghost, the sacred vibration of Aum that enfolds your soul when you enter the silence. That sound, that inner word, is the Christ returning not to the world, but to you. The Bible speaks of the Word that was with God and was God. The yogis call it Aum, the primal sound from which all creation flows. The Comforter, the invisible one, is not a future event, it is a present reality, vibrating now within your breath, pulsing now within your spine, waiting now within your consciousness to be heard, known, embraced. When you meditate deeply, when breath stills and thoughts cease, you begin to hear it not with ears, but with sula, soundless sound, a river of light, a peace that surpasses all understanding. This is the Christ returning not to the world of nations, but to the kingdom within. And yet how many miss it, looking always outward, waiting for signs in the clouds, waiting for temples to rise or empires to fall, not knowing that the true temple is the spine and the true throne is the Christ center between the eyebrows. The real battle is not in the Middle East, but in the middle of your consciousness between the downward pull of Maya and the upward call of God. The apocalypse is not destruction, but revelation, the unveiling of your eternal identity. And the second coming is not for the many, but for the one who dares to close his eyes, quiet his breath, and open his heart to the God who never left. There is no need to wait for a Savior to come. You are the field in which the Christ must rise. You are the Bethlehem in which the light must be born. You are the disciple awaiting the return, not in fear but in stillness, not in hysteria but in humility. The Master comes again and again, not in robes or sandals, but as intuition, as inner knowing, as the peace that floods your being when ego falls silent and love takes its rightful place as king. Do not wait for heaven to appear in the sky, it is waiting to rise in your soul. The second coming is not a prophesied, is a choice. Make it now. Awaken. And let the Christ who once walked the hills of Galilee walk now through the corridors of your awareness. Let the light that turned water into wine turn your sorrow into joy. Let the one who rose from death rise again within you, not someday, but now, this very breath, this very moment. And now, dear soul, let us step beyond symbolism, beyond interpretation, and into the sacred chamber of practice, for the mysteries of spirit are not fully unlocked by intellect alone, nor by reading or belief, but by the direct communion of the soul with the infinite through the breath, through the spine, through the divine art of inner stillness. This is what the yogis called yoga, and what Jesus received during the silent years the world has forgotten. For in those lost years, hidden from the Gospels but remembered in the ether of divine testimony, Jesus did not merely wander in obscurity, he traveled eastward into the timeless Himalayas, into the presence of illumined rishis, into the sanctuaries of eternal knowledge where Kriya Yoga, the sacred science of breath and divine union, was offered to him not as religion, but as remembrance. This practice, this inner ladder of breath ascending the spine, became not only his personal sadhana, but the root of the miracles misunderstood by a world addicted to spectacle and blind to the laws of spirit. For what is Kriya Yoga, if not the resurrection breath of God circulating through the temple of man? It is not mere technique. It is not breathwork for the body. It is the highway of spirit, the sacred fire flowing up through the chakras, purifying karma, awakening memory, restoring the soul to its divine throne. When Jesus withdrew into the wilderness, when he fasted for 40 days, when he healed with a touch and spoke with a voice that stirred centuries of silence, it was not magic, it was mastery. It was the result of yogic realization, where the will of God becomes your own, and where the life force, normally enslaved to the senses, is drawn upward in loving offering back to its source. This is why Jesus walked on water, because he had transcended the gravitational pull of ego and matter. This is why he raised Lazarus, because he knew that the soul cannot die, only forget. And this is why his body rose from the tomb, because the yogi who has conquered breath has conquered death. Kriya Yoga is not new. It is the science behind all saints. It is the golden thread connecting Krishna, Christ, Babaji, and all awakened ones, known by many names but united by one realization, that God is not separate, that heaven is within, and that the breath is the chariot by which the soul rides home. Yogananda was sent by Babaji to bring this knowledge back to the West, not as an alternative religion, but as the completion of a forgotten truth that what Jesus lived, we too are meant to live. That his works were not his alone, but demonstrations of a path open to every soul who will walk it. And now, beloved, that path lies before you, not in the pages of old scriptures alone, but in the sacred art of stillness you may enter tonight. The next time you sit to pray, not with words but with breath, not in fear but in surrender. Kriya Yoga is the practice Jesus received and now returns to you, veiled not in dogma but in inner simplicity, available not to the elite but to the sincere. When you draw your energy inward, when you lift your gaze to the spiritual eye, when you learn to commune not through ritual but through vibration, you will find that the same Christ who walked the earth now walks within your spine, rising breath by breath from earth to ether, from ego to eternity, until you too can say not with arrogance, but with radiant humility I and my Father are one. So take up the practice, not as an obligation, but as a return. Let Kriya become the cross you no longer bear, but transcend. Let it be your resurrection breath, your daily ascent into the kingdom within. And when you practice, know this: you are not imitating Christ. You are discovering Him within. You are not remembering a man. You are reawakening the God that man came to reveal. This is the sacred heritage of your soul, not separation, but union. Not worship, but realization. Not waiting, but returning. Let the breath carry you home. Let the silence reveal what has never been absent. Let the practice awaken what has always been true. And now, let us go even deeper into the river of remembrance, into the place where the divisions of religion dissolve like morning mist beneath the sun of divine realization. For the story you have been told is only half written, and the light you have received is only half shown, because the East and West were never meant to be strangers, never meant to live in suspicion of one another, never meant to gaze across the oceans with theological misunderstanding or doctrinal pride. No, my beloved, they are not two paths, they are two wings of the same great swan, soaring through the ether of truth. The Christ and the Krishna, the Gospel and the Gita, the Aum and the Amen, are not rivals echoing different gods, but brothers speaking one eternal word in two divine accents. What you were taught to see as separate was never meant to be separate. What institutional memory divided, divine memory now begins to reunite. For the West is the body strong, structured, searching for God through action, form, incarnation, and history. And the East is the soul quiet, contemplative, searching for God in the inner silence, in the eternal breath, in the still witness behind all change. But what is the body without the soul? What is movement without silence? What is the cross without the lotus? Or the birth of Christ without the eternal Aum from which all birth arises? When you look upon the life of Jesus without the veil of institutional editing, without the filters of religious politics or historical suppression, you begin to see something so luminous, so obvious, so humbling, that it stops the breath and melts the walls of spiritual ignorance. That Jesus the Christ was not Western, not Eastern, but divine. He was not sent to found a religion, but to awaken a realization. He did not speak in chapters and verses, but in vibration, in example, in the radiant energy of his God union. He did not say, "Follow me so you can belong to a church." He said, "Follow me so you may become as I am." He did not say, "I am the only way." He said, "I am the way," meaning the consciousness within the inner passage from ego to soul, from illusion to light, from separation to oneness. And when we look with the clear eye of spirit, we see that same consciousness pulsing in the words of the Upanishads, in the songs of Krishna, in the meditations of the yogis, in the breath of Kriya, in the gaze turned inward to the spiritual eye. This is not cultural fusion. This is soul recognition. What was lost must now be remembered, not with historical arguments or theological debates, but with the purity of spiritual intuition, which says, "I know this feeling. I have heard this voice before, not in language but in light." And when you touch that vibration within the vibration of love that liberates, of stillness that heals, of union that dissolves your boundaries, then you know. The Christ of Galilee and the Krishna of Vrindavan speak to the same soul within you. And their message is not rivalry, it is return. Return to God, who lives within you. Return to the kingdom, not in the clouds, but behind the closed eyes. Return to the eternal religion of self-realization, which is not Hindu or Christian or Buddhist or Muslim, but simply divine. Yes, the West and the East were separated by centuries of misinterpretation. Yes, ego built towers where temples should have stood. Yes, power often replaced purity. But none of that can erase the eternal bond between Christ and yoga, between the Gospels and the Gita, between your breath and God's love. For now, in this new age of awakening, the walls are trembling, the gates are opening, the wisdom once hidden is returning, not to the scholars, but to the seekers. Not to the institutions, but to the hearts that long to see clearly. And you, beloved soul, are a part of this remembering. You were born to bridge these worlds. You were sent not merely to believe, but to unify. You carry in your soul the cross and the lotus, the silence and the song, the fire of the prophets and the peace of the sages. Do not shrink from this sacred inheritance. Embrace it. Meditate with Christ in your spine. Chant Aum with Krishna in your heart. Read the Gospel with yogic eyes. Read the Gita with Christ's love flowing through your veins. This is the harmony the world forgot. This is the reunion your soul has been craving. And in remembering it, you do not abandon your tradition, you fulfill it. So walk now not as one who must choose sides, but as one who sees the whole. Speak not as a defender of doctrines, but as a child of light. Worship not with borrowed rituals, but with the fire of direct experience. And above all, love. Love without label. Love with the boundless compassion of a soul who has seen the unity beneath the forms. That is what Jesus learned from the yogis of India. And that is what you are now remembering in yourself. And now, dear soul, as we come to the sacred close of this journey, not the end, but the deepening, you must understand what all of this has been pointing toward. Why the lost years of Jesus matter. Why the voices of ancient yogis still echo through the silence of your own inner temple. Why the teachings that once seemed scattered and foreign now come together like the hidden strands of a golden tapestry, converging in the still center of your own awakening heart. For it is not enough to learn history if it does not become memory, not enough to receive teachings if they do not ignite realization, not enough to be told the truth if you do not live it in the marrow of your being. The purpose of revelation is not admiration, but transformation. And the soul, your soul, has not traveled across centuries of incarnations only to bow before sacred stories. No, it has come to become the story, to embody the flame, to walk the path from mind to spirit until there is no longer any you, left only the living, breathing presence of the infinite shining through every glance, every breath, every silent thought surrendered to God. For what Jesus received from the rishis and sages of India was not a system or a ceremony, but a vibration, the vibration of divine stillness, of breathless inner communion, of the realization that I and my Father are one, is not a claim reserved for the Messiah, but a destiny written into the spiritual DNA of every soul. And you, my beloved, are no exception. That Christ's light dwells in you now, sleeping perhaps beneath the noise of daily striving, but stirring with every breath you take in reverence, with every moment you turn inward, with every prayer whispered not to a distant sky, but to the boundless kingdom within. That kingdom is real. That silence is alive. And that Christ, unconfined by form, undivided by culture, unlimited by dogma, waits you in the stillness between two thoughts, in the breath between two moments, in the gaze between two worlds. So I ask you now not merely to believe this truth, but to prove it. For faith without direct perception is the beginning, not the end. Jesus did not say, "Worship me," but "Follow me." Follow him not in robes and rituals, but in meditation, in renunciation of ego, in surrender of fear, in ceaseless communion with God, until you too can say, not with pride, but with humility, not I, but Christ within me lives. And when that realization floods your being not as an idea, but as a presence, then you will see what he saw. You will feel what he felt. You will heal, not because of your will, but because God's love has no choice but to overflow through one who has become a channel pure and open. This is the second coming, not a prophet riding clouds, but the awakening of Christ, consciousness in your spine, your breath, your innermost awareness where God alone lives and nothing else can survive. So meditate, breathe with devotion, chant Aum with love, bow to no one but the God within all. See in Jesus not a theological figure, but the reflection of your future self. See in Krishna not a foreign deity, but your eternal friend. And in that sacred fusion, let the east and west dissolve in you like two wings returning to the one bird, like two names uttered in the same cry of the heart, like two rivers meeting in the ocean of divine bliss. You were not born to worship divided truth. You were born to become one with it. You were not born to be a child of tradition. You were born to be a child of light. And so, as this message closes, let your inner journey begin, not by effort, but by surrender, not by force, but by stillness, not by seeking outward, but by turning inward where the breath slows, the thoughts fall silent, and the whisper of God becomes the only sound your soul remembers. May the lost light now be found in you. May the Christ of Galilee and the Krishna of India rise as one sun in the sky of your soul, and may you never again look outward for what already shines within. Peace. Amen.